today I am going to talk about one of my most favorite topics, and that is tomatoes. And I'm Marianne, and I'm the garden director at the Coast Keeper Garden. I'm also an Orange County Master Gardener, and I've had multiple years and successes and failures with tomatoes. So over the years, I've gained some tips and tricks that I'm going to show you today. For today's workshop, for illustrative purposes, I'm planting in a pot. And I actually like to grow my tomatoes in a pot. The reason being is I can control the soil that's in the pot. And I also like the fact that I can move the pot around my garden. That way, as the sun changes, and also as I want to plant different things in my garden, I have flexibility to move my tomato plants around. But planting them in the ground is just fine. They do well either way. So the first thing I want to talk about is your soil. You need to invest in some good soil. If you go out and just plant your tomato in the soil that's in your garden, or just throw some dirt in a pot, you're really not going to have really good results. Tomatoes are what are called feeder plants. And what that means is they continuously draw nutrients and water up into the leaves of the plant. So they need to be fed constantly. And one of the ways that you can do that is by buying some really good soil. I filled my pot up today with this Kellogg's product. It's called Raised Bed and Potting Soil. But you can use any potting soil as long as it's marked for growing vegetables. And there's a plethora of organic products out there. Just make sure that you buy whatever is organic. And the other thing that I mixed into my pot is I mixed in some compost. You don't have to put in compost. I've done it without compost and it's fine, but I happen to have it. If you do use compost, be sure you buy something that's actually labeled compost. What you don't want to use is you don't want to use something that's labeled as manure. If you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any big box store, for about $1.50, you can buy a huge bag of manure. And it's really strong. If you use it directly in your soil or directly in your pots, it'll actually burn the roots of your plant. So do not use straight manure. There's a reason why it's only $1.50 a bag. So I've got my compost in here and I've got my soil. Remember what I mentioned in other episodes, plant high. As time goes by, you'll be surprised, your soil sinks. So always put in more soil than you think you're going to need, because as time goes by, you'll be surprised how much it sinks. Okay, so let's talk about tomatoes. There are so many varieties of tomatoes out there. It's just amazing. Most tomatoes that you will buy at any nursery are what are called hybrid tomatoes. And what that means is that they've been genetically engineered to grow and not be affected by disease, mildew. There's a whole plethora of diseases that tomatoes get, but biologists have created tomatoes that are resistant to that. And normally when you buy your tomatoes, on the back of the tag, it will tell you what your tomato is resistant against. I wouldn't worry too much about it though, because just about every tomato on the market now is bred so it doesn't get disease and all that kind of stuff. There are tomatoes that are called heirloom tomatoes. It's a whole different bailiwick and a whole different growing method, and they're much harder to grow. For the average person, even for me, I like the hybrids because I have a really good luck with them. Now, when you go shopping, you're going to want to look at the tag really carefully. There's two types of tomatoes. There's determinate and there's interdeterminate. Interdeterminate is your tomato that is viney, which means that it can grow up and be 10 to 12 feet tall. Determinate tomatoes are tomatoes that stay shorter, that only get to be about 4 feet tall. For a pot like this, I've chosen a shorter tomato. It's called a determinate tomato. And on the back of your tag, it will tell you how tall it will get. It tells you how many days to maturity. This particular tomato is 70 days. This is called a patio tomato. So if you see anything marked patio, you know it's good for a pot. And it also tells me that my fruit size is going to be 3 to 4 ounces, which is actually a pretty big tomato. It's going to be about this big. Now, one of the most important things about growing tomatoes, and I wish I didn't learn this tip until quite a while ago. I wish I had known this since I had first started growing tomatoes, but gardening is a process and you're always learning something new. When you plant a tomato, you want to plant a tomato deep. And what that means is that you're actually going to plant part of the stem under the soil. What happens is when the stem is under the soil, it actually grows roots, and roots flow out like this. So I will show you when I'm getting ready to plant this. The first thing I'm going to do is, because remember, this is going to be under the soil. I'm going to take my fingers and I am going to break off, or you can use a pair of clippers. And you don't have to get them all, but I'm going to break off all these leaves. So as you can see, I'm just actually taking this all off. So basically now I have a stem, and then I've left 1, 2, 3, I've left 4 branches up above. So that's how your tomato is going to look when you plant it. So now what you're going to do is, my soil's in here, you're going to dig a hole in the middle of your pot. Try to space it so it's right in the middle. That way when you put your tomato cage on, your tomato is right in the middle of the pot. So you're going to dig down. This is going to be pretty far down. Normally, I must tell you, I don't buy tomatoes this big, but I didn't feel like driving around and doing the curbside pickup. So this is the tomato I'm using today. But normally my tomatoes are only about this big, but this is fine for illustrative purposes. So I'm going to pull this out. You can see it's been in here for a while because you can see it's exactly the shape of the container. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to loosen this up just a little bit, just kind of wiggle it with my fingers. I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it down in my pot like that. And then I'm going to fill in all my soil. And I actually still have room. If you look, I don't know if you can see very well, putting my soil in. I'll kind of tilt this pot so you can see a little bit better. But you can see I still have some stems showing. So after you get everything in like that, then what you're going to do is you're going to get some more soil, and you're going to put more soil in like this, and you are going to fill it all the way up. And I still have more to go. So when I'm done, all you're going to see of this tomato is just this top. And that's how you need to plant a tomato. If you're planting your tomatoes in the ground, you're going to need to dig a hole and amend the soil at least 3 feet deep and 6 feet wide. So you'll actually need to take a shovel and actually amend the soil. But this is why I like using a pot, is because you don't have to do all that. But I know lots of people that grow tomatoes in the ground and have great success. So for illustrative purposes, let's think that I filled this all up. All that's left of my tomato is this. You're going to need one of these. This is called a tomato cage. And you're going to need to put this tomato cage on your tomato now. Even though the tomato's tiny, put the cage on now. I can't tell you how many times I thought, oh, I'll put that on later. And then by the time I go to put it on, the tomatoes are everywhere, and it's really hard to get in the cage. So put your cage on right when you plant your tomato. The best time to plant your tomatoes is anytime after March 15th. You really need to plant your tomatoes by the end of April. Anything later than the end of April is too late. The reason being is that tomatoes only produce fruit when the weather is below 85 degrees. So if you don't get your tomatoes going now, we're going to have a heat wave and you'll never really get a good crop of tomatoes. So you need to get your tomatoes in now. So if you're going to plant your tomatoes, I highly recommend you do it within the next week or two. I've planted them later with mixed success, but you really have the best success if you get them in now before it warms up. Now, the next thing that really, really, really helps with tomatoes is fertilizer. fertilizing. So let me show you. This is the best stuff ever. This is called Organic Plus Fish and Kelp Fertilizer. And all you do is you put 2 tablespoons of this into a gallon of water. And I use this at least once a week. Again, like I said, tomatoes are really, really, really big feeders. So this makes a huge difference. So you're gonna wanna get a product that actually says on the back that you can dilute it. This is really nice. You can make a lot with this. I actually had this left from last year. It's still fine. The expiration date is until next year. So it's a good investment. I think to buy one of these is probably about $12, but it's well worth the investment. Now, when you water your tomatoes, remember, tomatoes need to dry out between watering. Take your finger, put your finger in the soil as deep as your pointer finger. And when the soil is dry, that's when you water. One of the mistakes people make is they keep the soil too moist. And what happens is that oftentimes you get little gnats. There are these little gnats that fly all around that love moisture. And once you get those, they're really hard to get rid of. They don't really seem to hurt the tomato plant itself, but it's just annoying when you go out into your yard and you have all these gnats flying around. So let your tomato dry out between waterings. I would usually say for me here, I water my tomatoes about once every 3 days, but during a heat wave, you may need to do it every day. So you just need to check on them and see, like I said, stick your finger in the soil and check on them. Now, I have to tell you, I've never ever had a year growing tomatoes where I haven't had some kind of pest. It's just inevitable. It happens every year. Luckily, there's a lot of organic products on the market that you can use that are just great. So the first thing I wanted to show you is this. This is the short name for this is BT. It stands for Bacterius I can't even pronounce it, thermangitis. But everyone just calls this BT. And what this is this is an organic product. And what you do is you put a teaspoon of it into a sprayer like this. And when you get the worms all over your tomatoes, you just put a teaspoon of this in your sprayer, you fill this with water, and you spray your tomatoes. You spray the whole surface completely wet. And what this organic product does is it affects the digestive system of the worms. And they're not able to eat and they die. So the biggest critter that you get on tomatoes is worms. The other thing that you'll want to use is you'll want to get yourself this. This is called neem oil extract, and it is also organic. Same thing, you'll put it in a sprayer like this, and you'll spray the tomato. Neem oil fights aphids and thrips, and there's also a creature that you get called spider mites. And this also will help with that. So there's a lot more to know about tomatoes. A great email to get a hold of me if you have questions is garden@coastkeeper.org. And I can tell you, I probably could talk another hour and a half on tomatoes. So shoot me an email and I'll be glad to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.